This is the Honda NT1100, their middleweight tourer that I think, starting at 12.5 grand, offers really very good value for money. In fact, you could kind of see it as like a more attainable half-price version of their £25,000 flagship tourer, the Goldwing, but still with plenty of Honda's touring know-how built in.
My only real criticism of the first generation of this bike was a couple of quirks and flaws that really could have been ironed out, but for 2025 this update is much improved and it seems to deal with all those little issues. So in this video we'll go through everything that I've learned from borrowing it for the past couple of weeks, with the 10 key things that you need to know about it.
Now, one of the things that I've always really liked about the NT1100 is the level of wind protection you're getting from, you know, what is, I guess, a mid-capacity bike, at least in the tourer market anyway. It doesn't have the bulk of a heavyweight like the Goldwing or something like that, but the way they've designed all these little deflectors and whatnot just works together to give you really very good coverage from wind and rain, of course. Specifically down at the bottom, you know, if you've ever ridden like a Goldwing with the flat 6 engine, or BMW's RT as well with the Boxer twin, you know, they do a little bit of a job of keeping your feet warm and dry. But on this bike, they've fitted it with some little plastic deflectors, and I'd say they're potentially even better at doing that job. And also, I guess, a lot easier to clean because they don't get the dirt caked on with the heat. Then you've got a 20-litre tank, so it flares out quite a lot, but also some extra bodywork, so there's a bit of mass to it. Your knees really do slot in very nicely. And so, yeah, there's not much wind on the lower body. And even working up to these little deflectors, which I think have been tweaked for this year, they've got a cutout which might reduce turbulence, but they do a really good job without handguards of pushing the wind up and over your hands and lower arms. The Goldwing does something very similar actually with wing mirrors, but I guess this is a slightly more affordable interpretation of the same concept. There was a slight problem with the last generation though. Although the windscreen was decent, it was really hard to adjust. You had to get off the bike to do it. And so I'm very glad to see for 2025 that they've given it a bit of an adjustment mechanism here so you can more easily move it up and down. It's still quite a reach, as you can see, and I wouldn't say it's the easiest mechanism. It's certainly quite hard to pull back up. There are better ones out there, whoops. But, you know, it's definitely an improvement on the last one, where, like I say, you had to get off the bike, and I suppose this camera being in the way is part of the problem there, which not everybody will face. At the back, we've got a 150mm longer rear mudguard as well, so that's to keep both the bike and the rider a little more clean if you've got a load of spray on the road. And so, yeah, like I say, all round, at this sort of price point especially, I don't think there are any other bikes that offer as good protection and cocooning as the NT1100. The only thing I might change is the windscreen, because there is a bit of buffeting, even with it in the highest position, when you're on the motorway at 70 or so. And while there isn't an official accessory Tour windscreen, there is probably something from a third party. Now, the riding position is another big tick for me on this bike. It's 820mm in the seat height, which is nice and moderate. Some bigger, more cruiser-inspired tourers can be very long and low, and I prefer to be a little bit more sat up, let's say, and that's probably as a result of this bike sharing the frame with the Africa Twin adventure bikes. It's tall enough that you feel like you've got great visibility, like there's enough room to stretch out, but also if it was loaded up with luggage and you had a passenger on the back, 820mm wouldn't be intimidating to get your feet down and get them planted when you do come to a standstill. The bar position's nice and wide, the pegs are really neutral, and they have added 20% more surface area to the sort of back of the seat, so there's a little bit of room to maneuver around a bit if you're getting uncomfortable, which is always handy. But they've added it to the back specifically so that they don't affect the standover, so it's still like I say, fairly easy to get both feet down, and I'm 5'9" or 175 centimeters. Presumably, plenty of people would be using this bike for a bit of two-up riding as well. And although I haven't had the pleasure of riding on the back of it, you certainly get plenty of space back there, and it's always good to see a substantial grab rail. I always think it feels a lot more secure if you've got something like that to hold on to when you're sat on the back. Now, number 3 of my things that I rather like on this bike would be the DCT system, and I wouldn't say that's always the case. You know, Honda put it on so many of their bikes now, like the Africa Twin, for example, where I'd probably still prefer a manual, but I think for something fairly practical and touring focused like this bike or the Goldwing, it really suits the nature of the bike. For anyone not familiar, DCT stands for dual clutch transmission, and it allows you to run the bike in an automatic mode. So it's just twist and go, look, no need to operate a clutch or a shifter, although you can pop it in manual and use the paddles on this left-hand switchgear to go up and down the box yourself. I think on this sort of bike, it does make it feel very day-to-day easy to use. It's quite nice when you're just cruising around to not have to think about it, and at least you do have that option to flick back into that manual mode if you so wish, or you can just override momentarily the automatic mode if you want to drop down a couple of gears when you do want to do an overtake, for example, or if you're on, you know, slightly more engaging twisty roads where your own gear selection is part of the fun. Now, for 2025, one thing they have done is really improve the low speed throttle response, so it feels much more controllable, which I think for some people is one of the reasons they don't necessarily love the idea of DCT, because you haven't got the clutch to smooth it out, so you're relying on the throttle. But I will say the work that they've done, not only on this bike, but all of the DCT models pretty much in the last year or two, has really done the trick. It feels much, much better at low speeds. And then also, this bike now gets an IMU, or inertial measurement unit, that sends lean angle data back to the bike so it can use it for the rider aids and stuff. That now feeds into the DCT as well, so it shouldn't shift mid-corner where you really don't want the bike to, you know, become unsettled. There are still a few tricks though for getting the most out of DCT. Putting it in rain mode, for example, when you're doing really low speed maneuvers to really smooth out the throttle response, that still helps a lot. So I've got user mode here with a more aggressive throttle response, but I might shift down one click on the riding modes into rain if I'm parking up or if I'm in slow moving traffic. The standard DCT mode, the drive mode as well, I do find a little bit, I don't know, it searches for the low revs, I guess for fuel efficiency, but I don't particularly like the way it feels. It doesn't feel as ready to go if you do want to twist the throttle, and so I find if you stick it in sport, it's much better. There's 3 different levels of the sport DCT mode as well, so you can choose how much it keeps the revs up, but generally the engine's a lot more responsive in this mode, so I pretty much always run it in that. And then, like I say, you know, if you do just want that extra bit of pep, remembering that you can momentarily just hit downshift, immediately it's down and ready to go, rather than just twisting the throttle and then waiting for the bike to realize and shifting down itself, which, you know, just feels a little unnatural. Oh, and handbrake. You can't park it in gear, of course. And so when you park on a hill, always remember to stick that on. It's not actually it's not connected to the rear caliper itself. It's actually a separate caliper. So quite a rudimentary system, but it certainly does the job. What else do we like then? Well, fuel economy is not bad. It's got a 20-litre tank, 20.4 litres, so a little bit bigger than the base Africa Twin that this bike is, you know, largely based upon. Not as big as the 25-litre tank on the Africa Twin Adventure Sports, but with the same 1100 parallel twin, it's not too bad on fuel at 5 litres per 100 kilometres, and so you should get around 400 kilometres on a tank, or 250 miles. That's assuming you ride fairly cautiously, so you hit those official consumption figures. Real world's probably going to be quite a bit less. But even if you get 150, 200, it's certainly not bad. It's appropriate for this style of bike, and I've found that generally I haven't been having to stop and fuel up any more often than I would find convenient. A big boost on this bike is that you get luggage as standard as well. That's another thing that really plays into how complete it feels as a sort of tourer. And if you look elsewhere at some of the competition, like the Tracer 9, but you have to go up to the Tracer 9 GT, which is 14,350, I believe, to get the hard luggage thrown in, or at least the side cases like this bike. All of the bikes, whether you go for the base model, the DCT version, or the new DCT with electronic suspension that's up over 14 grand, get the luggage bundled in. And while that was the case with the previous generation, there's a really significant improvement in that they were very slim on the last bike, and now they've made them much more practical in that they're big enough to get a full face helmet in. So definitely good if you're wanting to stash them if you stop off when you're out on the bike for the day, or even, you know, a weekend away or something like that. I will still say the slightly contoured, sculpted shape of them is a little less practical than maybe like squared off aluminium cases that you get on an adventure bike. I can't fit my camera bag in, for example, even though it looks like it should fit. It doesn't because of the rounded shape of it. But generally, you've got to say getting the luggage thrown in that's big enough for 2 lids at this price is really very, very good. And also you could chuck the top box on top, which is really quite big as well. Now on the tech front, I'm a little bit divided on this one. It gets a lot of good stuff. 3 riding modes, 2 custom slots so you can get it dialed in yourself. It's got the inertial measurement unit now, which is great. So the TC and ABS are lean sensitive, as well as the DCT system. There's cruise control as well, connectivity features, and you can also use CarPlay on this bike. So you've got the option to connect your phone through USB and get your favorite apps and whatnot on the dash, which is very rare. There are a few bikes that offer it, but Honda, Harley and Indian, I think, are the ones that you'll most commonly find it on. And so yeah, plenty of goodies to go at. The only thing I will say is it has led to quite a busy situation on the switchgear, and I think this was a criticism for a lot of people on the previous gen, and it's still true of this one as well. I'm not expecting to be able to just, you know, jump on a bike like this with all these features and intuitively know how to use every single feature at a moment's notice, but still, you've got to say, it does feel like they could have been a touch more obvious with how they've laid things out. I mean, heated grips, for example, even on some of the other Honda bikes, there's just a little button actually on the grip. Triumph do that as well, for example, and I'm sure there are many other implementations of heated grips that are quite easy to get on with. On this bike though, I guess the quickest way to do it is to hit this function button, which is kind of hidden behind here, and then you've got another function button where you can turn it up and down, and you can assign different, you know, you can do the volume, you can do the lighting as to whether it's automatic or not, but it does feel like a slight overcomplication of that process. The buttons themselves, like there's one up here that has a phone, but also a voice command icon, but also a menu little symbol as well, and so it's not necessarily that apparent as to what that's going to do when you hit it. You know, the forward and back skip buttons for the media, you'd expect those to be next to each other maybe. And same for this D-pad. You'd think up, down, left, right, but that's actually enter. That's actually back, even though back is to the right of the enter button, and then left and right is the little thing in the middle. Why not just put a little joystick for the up, down, left, right, and then that would have left more space here and here for getting these buttons laid out a bit more intuitively. Also, like a function switch, and a favorite switch with a star. Oh, I don't know, man. Even the rider aids, like you can see here, the favorite button is assigned to the traction control. 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. You cycle through on the dash there. It's not really that obvious as to whether 3 is more TC or more slip, i.e. less TC. And I think it changes from power to engine braking to traction control. So yeah, I just feel like the tech could have been a bit more intuitive. Speaking of intuitive tech, a massive thanks to today's video sponsor though, and that's Kalamoto. They make, in my opinion, the best motorcycle navigation app on the market, with their own dedicated algorithm that seeks out curvy roads and twisties so you never have to ride a boring straight road again. Perfect for finding new routes if you're going touring, perfect as well for mixing up your regular rides so you don't get bored of the same combinations. And I will also point out it's CarPlay compatible, so if you did have it, you know, maybe in your pocket with a wireless CarPlay adapter, or even if you just connected it through the cable, you could get Kalamoto on a bike like this up on the main dash. So really very good. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. And there are 2 links down in the description below. One to a free trial if you want to try it out, and another for a discount code if you do take out a premium membership. So a massive thanks to Kalamoto for their ongoing support and for making, you know, these free to view videos possible. Now, like I say, this bike, bit of a bump there. Like I say, this bike gets the same frame and a lot of the same chassis structure, same engine as well, as the Africa Twins. And so you might think it's going to be a bit, you know, slow and steady out on the road. But I will say, the handling has always surprised me as to how good it is. It doesn't look like it's going to be a quick bike in terms of the styling. It's quite bulky as well. But the handling is really rather nice. I've always thought the way that they've canted that parallel twin forward in the Africa Twins has helped to give them a really low, easy to ride center of gravity. But also, you know, the big difference versus an Africa Twin is the cast aluminium wheels with the 17-inch front. And so it does flick side to side rather nicely indeed. And it's really pleasant to ride. I wouldn't say it's going to be the most aggressive handling bike. I've also got the Tiger Sport 800 at the moment. You could see that kind of as a competitor. Jumping on that bike, you feel like there's more weight over the front, so maybe you'll feel a bit more connected to the handling. But again, this bike just feels really easy to use, really practical, and so it's good on the open road, but also surprisingly easy to maneuver around at lower speeds. And that's what I think is a brilliant choice if you're looking for something that can do the weekends away, can do a bit of Sunday riding, but also if you wanted to commute through town. I've taken this bike into Bristol a few times this week, and it's a doddle to ride, especially with the DCT and the improvements they've made at lower speeds. And so yeah, I wouldn't hesitate at all. This is the version spec with the electronic suspension package as well. It used to be available on the Africa Twin only. Now you can spec it up on this model. Naturally, you'll pay a bit more for it as well, but it really does suit a tourer where you want that versatility and adaptability. So it's semi-active, electronically adjustable, and so measuring the bike's behavior in real time and trying to give you the best possible damping. You can choose from a few different modes. I've got it set to the kind of soft damping at the moment, and yeah, I love that about this bike. I think it's something that just suits touring bikes, and it's always been one of the more recent pieces of tech that I've always thought is worth every penny. Some people don't care about connectivity, and I get that. Some people don't really feel like they're bothered about lean sensitive rider aids. Certainly radars, adaptive cruise control and blind spot warnings, people seem to be a little bit unbothered by as well. But the thing with semi-active suspension is you're always feeling the benefit out of it on the road, because it's constantly working, and realistically you're never that often going to be bothered to twiddle with the suspension settings manually if you're commuting or going for a quick ride the next day, or even I bet some people can't be bothered to mess with the preload when they're taking a passenger and luggage. Now this Africa Twin engine, the 1100, you know, certainly versus some of the other options on the market, the Tracer 9, the Suzuki GSX 1000 GX, is it? Well, it's not going to sound like the most exciting option, is it? And at 100 horsepower, it's probably not the most powerful either, but it does have a rather nice character to it. I've always loved it in the Africa Twin, and it's decent in this bike as well. Maybe it won't, you know, accelerate right up to bonkers speeds and really put that huge grin on your face that's induced by some serious G-force, but it is, you know, actually relatively peppy, especially if you put it in the lively power mode. Obviously it feels a lot more docile if you put it in rain, but yeah, with an aggressive power mode, there's certainly an immediacy in the mid-range, which I guess is what this engine is all about, and it will get you up to, you know, 80, 90, 100 pretty briskly. And I think for a lot of the people who are buying this sort of bike, that's realistically mainly what they want. So on the spec sheet, it may not be, well, it's not going to win you a game of top trumps, but it's one of those bikes that I think in reality on the road, for the sort of thing it's intended for, is going to be enough. So look, lots to like about this bike. I'd say that's the only thing really. It's not going to be the one that you'd buy because it's the most exciting to look at And certainly on the riding experience side as well, it's not the most exciting to ride either. But I don't think that's necessarily what Honda have built it for. I think they've built it as more of a capable, refined, practical tourer than they have something that's a competitor for the sports tourers like the Tiger 800 I mentioned, the Tracer 9, the Suzuki, and that sort of bike. They've cleaned it up a bit at the front end for this year, so they've given it indicators that are integrated with the daytime running light at the front. They have tweaked the bodywork. There's also like a champagne kind of paint job, which I think suits it best as well. The black looks a little bit plain for me. This blue's all right. The champagne I think looks good, but still, even in the best paint job, you know, I've got the Tiger 800 at the moment. I put them side by side, and one certainly looks more exciting than the other. But you know, assuming that's not what you're after anyway, and you want something that's a bit more, I've got to say it, sensible, then it's absolutely a really solid choice. And all these little tweaks and improvements they've made for the new model year have made it even better in that regard.
As always though, let me know what you think of the bike down in the comments below. And if you want to see our pick of some of the other best new and updated tourists for 2025, then I'll leave our list on the screen now so you can give it a watch if you missed it. Do hit subscribe for more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.